Welcome to Sounding Freedom and Liberation, a podcast series looking at the power of music and sound to engage with ideas of freedom and liberation. I'm Ferdia Stone-Davis.
And I'm Sharissa Granger. Today we welcome our guest, Dr. Polly Paulusma, who is both a musician and a scholar. She has been a signed recording artist since 2003, releasing albums on Bjork's label One Little Independent, formerly One Little Indian, and then founding her own folk label Wild Sound, which has supported the work of 9 other independent folk and acoustic artists. Her albums have achieved international critical acclaim, and her songs have been published by Sony ATV in Los Angeles. She has toured the US, the UK, and Europe extensively, supporting Bob Dylan, Jamie Cullum, Coldplay, and Marianne Faithfull in her travels. She continues to record and release records with One Little Independent. Her latest album is called Wildfires. Alongside her music, Dr. Paulusma completed a doctorate at the University of East Anglia on Angela Carter and folk music, and her book, based on this, Angela Carter and Folk Music, Invisible Music, Prose and the Art of Canarography, was published in 2023 by Bloomsbury. Between writing, recording, and touring, Dr. Paulusma teaches songwriting and poetry for Cambridge University and songwriting for the Institute of Contemporary Music Performance, where she is Associate Professor of Song and Literature. Welcome, Dr. Paulusma. So today we would like to open our conversation with a first question that we've been asking all our guests, which is, what does freedom mean to you, and how do you practice freedom on a daily basis?
Such a lovely question. And it's good to think about it, actually. Good to take time to think about it. I think of freedom. There's a lovely bit in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale about freedom to and freedom from. And to my mind, that's such a great way of expressing how you can think about freedom as freedom to do things, but also freedom from things. And I'm very lucky in that I have a lot of freedom in my life to be creative. I wake up very early and I have a routine every morning that I write my morning pages, which is this free flow writing exercise advocated by Julia Cameron in the wonderful book The Artist's Way, which if you haven't discovered it, please go look at it. It's a 12-week course in recovering your creativity, and one of the main tools is this thing, which is to wake up every morning and just do a brain dump, basically. And it's the most liberating thing, to free yourself from your own detritus, just to get all the rubbish that your brain piles up like limescale, just to chip it off and give yourself a chance to see what's underneath. And I do that every day because I'm a morning bird. I've always been very good at early mornings. So I give myself the freedom to do that, and it opens a lot of doors for me. I think I've had to fight to be creative. It's not been just sort of handed to me, and I think a lot of creative people that I know who experience the ravages of normal life would say the same. That it's a sort of daily building up the walls to make sure that you can do it, carving the channels to stop all that detritus falling in and preventing you from thinking your thoughts. But just having space to have ideas and think your thoughts is the biggest freedom of all, I think. And it's hard won, and I don't take it for granted. So, yeah, I think that's probably the big one.
That's great. Thank you so much. That kind of therapeutic, it's like the process of the therapeutic writing down to kind of get rid of the other stuff in order to get on with that real task of being creative.
Yeah, finding that. I think of it a bit like gold. It's like there's a seam of gold underneath there somewhere, but it's a job to clear it out. And people are sometimes surprised, like, but I don't feel inspired, or I don't have those ideas. It's like, have you tried to clear all that stuff that's sitting on top of your ideas away? It takes work, and sometimes you don't find much, but sometimes you do. But I don't think you can get anywhere without beginning that kind of sweep.
Thank you. And then, obviously, because you're a musician, and then you have this wonderful book. But would you be able to tell us how, you came to be interested in what you have presented for us, in your book on Angela Carter and folk music? How did it happen? How did those interests emerge?
It was serendipity, but I can see how it happened as well, if you know what I mean. So for, I think, all my life, I've had these two interests. I feel like I've been riding two racehorses all my life. I love literature. I read English here in Cambridge many years ago. My first job was at the BBC, so I was always sort of mucking about with words, But I always was writing songs. I started writing songs when I was 10. I was sitting in a cupboard with a Casio keyboard. I remember writing my first one. And it was always a kind of wonderful, reflexive. It was like, when a doctor hits your knee and it bounces up. It was like that kind of reaction to the universe. It was like a way of understanding what was happening, a sort of reactive processing power, I guess. It's one of those things that it's funny, you don't really understand why everybody's not doing it, just because you just start doing it and it makes a lot of sense. It starts to make sense of the world. But I've always loved these two things, and I saw them as quite separate for a long time. And I had when I was in my late 20s, I signed to a record deal, and I was very much a songwriter and a musician. And about, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years later, when I started my family, and I took a pause from the kind of the hurly-burly of that life, I kind of retreated to the other thing, like looking at the literature side. And I had a babe in arms, and I decided to start tutoring people. Just the odd student would come and talk poetry, and I remembered how much I loved it. So it felt like the other thing until, as the kids grew up, not grew up, but they got bigger, and I started writing songs again, and I just founded a label. And I went to a folk music conference, but at the same time, I'd been booked by Cambridge to supervise a student in Angela Carter. It was pretty random. And I just sort of said, yes, that sounds great, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So I took all the Angela Carter books I could think of with me to this folk music conference. And I was going to bone up on Angela Carter, who I'd loved and adored as a student, while I was at this music bash, which was much more to do with my record label life. But it was because of that serendipity. I had these two interests in my head at the same time, and I was going down into the bar and listening to these ancient songs of blood and gore and incest and babies being killed in the forest and brothers and sisters running, all the stuff that traditional folk songs have, which are horrific and extraordinarily beautiful. Like Carter called them like a bone, like beauty like a bone, which I think is so true. And then I was going up and reading her stories, and I just had this absolutely visceral knowledge. I just knew that she knew them. And I really strongly was overcome with this feeling. All the hairs went up on my arms. It was a very physical reaction. And it wasn't just that she knew them. I knew that she knew how to sing them. And I think I knew that because I was a singer. So it was like this amazing kind of perfect storm of elements, because I knew performance, because I was there and absorbing folk song as a musician, but because I was there with my academic hat as well, thinking about Carter's stories, that I was able to I could see something that other people hadn't seen, but it was very instinctive as a response. It was a very physical knowledge. And I basically spent the next 6 years trying to understand why I knew what I knew. It's a wonderful journey. I really loved the journey of discovery.
And then in terms of, Angela Carter is kind of, I suppose, well known for the kind of the feminist side of things and the kind of, can you explain, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you explain in terms of relating to ideas of freedom and liberation, how does this come about, or how did this come about? Was it a conscious thing? Maybe it's there because it's Angela Carter and how she's processing, women and women's roles, for example.
What do you mean, why?
Why, in terms of why the ideas of freedom and liberation might be interesting in terms of Angela Carter, and in terms then of, the folk song that she's drawing on.
Well, she was always, the reason why she's so celebrated, apart from the fact that she is a beautiful writer, is that she's always trying to undermine established structures, always. And I think she loved folk song alongside circus, alongside tattoo art, alongside all kinds of other, what would be deemed lowbrow art forms, because they were coming from some kind of atavistic, ancient consciousness that she revelled in and she drew great inspiration from. But she wouldn't have said, and I'm not going to be inspired. The other thing she was inspired by, Baudelaire, Shakespeare constantly. She was an absolute magpie. And I guess that's the way that she expressed freedom was to roam. She would just roam across boundaries, across disciplines, and pick up little sparkly things that fascinated her from wherever she fancied it, and she didn't have to explain where. But she hid the folk song connections for a while. She wasn't very vocal. She was very vocal about her fairy tale inspirations, but she was more secretive about her folk song influences, and I don't know why. Part of me wonders if it relates that she bound them up with the first marriage, and when that ended very painfully, maybe she just wanted to kind of park it. But I feel that she carried her love of that material forward into her writing for her entire career. You can find bits of it in Wise Children, in her last novel, in Nights at the Circus, her penultimate one. The musical evidence of its influence on her imagination is everywhere. So I'm not sure I'm convinced by the idea that she was ashamed of it. But it's a bit of a mystery. I wish I could ask her.
Yeah. I often think that, who would you have to your kind of dinner table kind of thing, and the kinds of things that you would ask them.
I'd love to have Jesus and Angela Carter, and I'd love to put them next to each other.
I wonder what would happen.
It'd be amazing.
So, when I was struck by two things, I think, immediately when reading your book. And I think, one, how pivotal it seems to have been to developing the project that you happen to have discovered these recordings following this amazing hunch that you had at that gathering, that she was a singer. So then you discovered these recordings of her singing and playing. So first of all, that was amazingly striking that you came across those. And then I suppose immediately followed up by this idea that it is held in a privately held archive. And I suppose it caused me to be thinking about the nature of the archive and who keeps the knowledge, who lets other people have the knowledge. And then I was thinking about, freedom in relation to that, and safeguarding these artifacts.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And really, my research projects relied on, and my searching for this knowledge and my thirst for this to try and unravel what I knew was underpinned. I think freedom is one aspect of it, but generosity is the flip side. I encountered a lot of generosity when I was asking questions, pulling threads, pushing against doors. So the first person that really helped me was Edmund Gordon, who I wrote a brilliant biography of Carter that came out in 2016. And I caught wind of the fact that he was from the estate. They told me that he was writing it. And so I went to do my master's at King's College London purely because he was there, so that I could find him for coffee and sit down and pick his brains. And so it was amazing to have this very clear, to be working backwards was a great joy to me, actually, because I knew what I was doing, and it was easy to follow the thread. So when I sat down with Edmund and asked him, he said, there's this person in Bristol. He didn't actually specify the gender. And the person had a name that could go either way. It could be male or female. It was a ambiguous first name. So I emailed them, and out of the blue, he said he had this person he just hadn't been able to follow up with them, but that they might be able to help me with this folk song query I had. So I did track them down. I emailed them, and they very kindly replied to me. And one thing led to another, but it took ages. Quite rightly, they were quite reserved and quite cautious, because I suspect there are a lot of Angela Carter nuts out there. I think a bit like Sylvia Plath, you know. There are lots of sort of pop researchers who might be, I don't know, might become slightly persistent in an unwelcome way. So I wanted to be cautious and not disrespectful. And there's always that fine line when you're dealing with a private archive. But as we went on, I met them, and they have become one of my dearest friends. It's just wonderful. I don't want to give their name away because I don't want them getting any unwanted solicitation, because since the writing of my book, the archive has been given to the British Library. So in answer to the other part of your question, it now has free access, which in terms of the British Library being, it is quite gate kept. You have to have a reader ticket and so on, but it's there and it's open now for anyone to see. But it was it sounds terribly glamorous to call it an archive. It was a box full of random bits of paper and a really scrappy old notebook with the cover all torn. But it was all her personal notebooks of folk songs, and so it was Carter's little lollipop musical notes, and quite childish. Mm-hmm. And editions of folk song compendia that she'd got songs from. It was absolute treasure trove for me, and it was through that person that the recording came to light as well. But it was only after I'd been rootling in the box for a while, taking lots of pictures, and it was about 6 months later that they contacted me to let me know, and they digitised it. It had fallen out of a cupboard of an old man who had Alzheimer's. Oh. This tape of Angela Carter singing. I mean, it was a miracle. The whole thing was, and it had only been done accidentally. They'd actually been intending to tape somebody else, the person who came after. I mean, it's one of those wonderful things, but it was so great to be able to hear her voice, and she actually sang surprisingly well. I was really happy to hear it. I was kind of half bracing myself for a pretty scratchy cat squeak, Mm-hmm. But she gave it some welly. She knew what she was doing, and it was lovely to hear her sense of rhythm, and just to have that proof that her body had breathed it, and that she'd stood up in front of people and done it, I think was really important to what I was trying to say about the way that she uses it in her language, that performance-based element of it, that somatic, embodied muscle memory of breathing the melody, which I know really well because of performing. But it is a very particular feeling to deliver songs to people in a room and to put it in their laps. It feels different to just singing it in the shower, or even imagining yourself singing it. It's not the same. That business of standing up and performing is it feels like sympathetic resonance. That is the tuning forks ringing. Like, you get people ring when you do it right. You start ringing, and you can see other people start ringing with you. And to be able to communicate in that way. It's a very particular language, and it gives you a particular feeling. And I think that's what I recognised in her writing that she was making me do.
Before we leave that, is there something particular about that? Having had some limited involvement in a kind of the folk scene, but it's is it fair to say that that resonance is a little different as well, in that people gather each to perform, each
there's
to sing,
egalitarian, and also people start joining in all the time. Folk clubs, you'll get on the chorus, and you can actually hear it on the recording that we have of Carter, that she's there are people that come in with her on the choruses, which is wonderful because everybody knows the song anyway. And there is this idea that you're actually singing the song on behalf of all the people that have sung it before you as well. So there's a kind of ghostly chorus when you sing these old songs. It's not the same as singing your own. I actually found it, although I am a singer, when I came to trying to understand what Carter was up to with this, I actually found I needed to sing these particular songs myself in order to understand how it was impacting on her imagination. Because just singing a song is not the same as handling this very old material, which gathers its own patina and its own residue. It's like you're climbing into... It reminds me of being a child and getting into the dress-up box and, putting on the old lace nightie and becoming the Victorian ghost, and then suddenly you're out of it again and you become a soldier. And there's this idea of climbing into all these different skins, which is very liberating, very freeing. There's something else as well. There's something gender liberating about it, which I arrived at through working with all this material. I realised that so many folk songs, it's sung like the opposite gender might sing as if they were. So a man very often sings from a woman's point of view and vice versa, in a heteronormative universe, of course. And I find that fascinating because it's old. I mean, the first one that was gathered that we know of, The Seeds of Love, 1901, am I remembering that right? But back at the turn of the century, is a man singing from a woman's perspective. And it wasn't laughable. Like, the folk tradition is incredibly all-embracing in that regard. That kind of gender blindness, I find incredibly ahead of its time for the folk tradition. There are many other elements of it which are unbelievably misogynist, don't get me wrong. Like, it's not like the big kind of rainbow flag. I wish it was. But I found this particular element of it was startling in its progressive attitude towards being able to step into somebody else's body and for that to be okay. I think it's really ahead of its time in that regard.
Thank you.
So the central thesis of your book, as we have understood it and discussed it, is that Angela Carter was deeply shaped by folk song, and that this then spills over into her writing. And we wondered, can you tell us more about this? What was the appeal of folk song, for instance, for Carter?
Well, I think there's something about the ancientness of the stories, a bit like her appeal with fairy tales. Taking something as raw material and being able to manipulate it, I think always fascinated her. And there is this idea with folk songs, as there is with fairy tales, that they're coming from a place where there is no author, where they belong to everybody. There's a wonderful folk singer now called Chris Wood, who says that the greatest songwriter that ever lived is Anon, which I love. This idea of a collective, I think it really appealed to her. She was a deep socialist, and so that idea of this kind of palette of stories which were there to be raided, and she could just rummage around in them, pull them out, cut them up, stick them upside down, do what she wanted. I think she loved that and loved wanting to run with them. I think she was also just very musical, and that bit gets forgotten sometimes. She obviously loved to sing. You can hear that in the recording of her singing. She took great pleasure in it. And actually her Japanese lover mentions in his memoir that she would sing all the time when she was sort of pottering around the house. So I know there was this deep musicality to her. She also loved listening to records, and as a performer, as an absorber and a listener, she was deeply musical. So the musicality of them, I think, tickled her. And you can hear the rhythmic. So what I got excited about was when I realised that she was giving me rhythmic codes. So for example, there's a space in the folk song tradition, and actually in fairy tales as well. It's called the Greenwood, and it's this place. It's usually on the edge of town. It's like scrap, where the caravans are, or the allotments, where it sort of starts turning into slightly dodgy, seedy places. She loves it because it's very productive and it's kind of far away from eyes. So it's where all kinds of exciting things can happen. And in the folk song tradition, the Greenwood is where, people get abducted by the fairies, babies get killed, people go missing for years and then suddenly turn up with huge beards. And lovers run away. It's like the place of possibility and danger, And people get murdered there all the time as well. It's not all a walk in the park. It's some of it's really grim. But it's very exciting because it's transformative. And one of my theories is that she sang songs about the Greenwood. Like there's one called Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight. There's one called Tamlin. There's a bunch of them. But a lot of them use a rhythm in the music, which sounds a bit like a horse galloping. If you were a poetic scansion kind of person, you might call it dactylic, but it sounds like like that, like a horse, like a cantering horse. And it's kind of exciting, and the rhythm kind of gets you feeling like, oh, something's going to happen. And I suddenly started clocking that she was using this rhythm when she was trying to create a sort of Greenwood space. And it might be a Greenwood, a literal forest. And she's got a lot of forests in her writing, as I'm sure you're aware. Like there's the Earl King's forest. There's Heroes and Villains, has a beautiful forest all around. There's many forests in her writing. But there's also places where the atmosphere of the Greenwood is applicable, even if it's not a forest. So there's a shop in Shadow Dance where terrible things happen. And I started to realise that she's got this sort of rhythmic understanding that I reckon she's got from singing these songs, where she knew how to create the atmosphere of a place, the kind of sonic geography of a place, through rhythmic association. Even if she wasn't talking about a wood, she could use that. And it's just like this subliminal language where a reader who's listening sonically or audially is going to start picking up the cues and the hints that something bad is going to happen. You can kind of it's almost like the strings in a movie, or like Jaws, It's like, here it comes. She was really clever. She was borrowing all, and I think it's because she was steeped in all this stuff, and because she'd performed it herself. It was really in her texture, in her physicality. I don't know if she was aware of it. Probably ask her and she wouldn't have a clue. I don't care. I can hear it. So I know it's there. And she was doing it whether she wanted to or not. But that's because I'm a musician and I know that she's borrowing language. She's borrowing those subliminal, subcutaneous cues from her singing memory and putting them into her writing for me to find them. And it's not just... I think the reason... Some people might think, this is rubbish, like you're just finding things that aren't there. But I know for a fact that so many musicians are inspired by her as a writer to write music. So I know I'm not alone in feeling that she's almost like a musician with us in the way that she writes. She seems to inspire that kind of onward trajectory in the way that another musician would. And that's because her writing is music, as far as I'm concerned.
Do you think there's any benefit then to reading it aloud in terms of this, the rhythms that she used?
100%. I always think it's worth everybody reading. And in fact, the whole turn towards the audiobook I find fascinating because I know it's kind of, everyone gets a little bit upset about it. I can't really do audiobooks, I've got to say, for myself, because I find myself not concentrating. I need the anchor of the page. But I love the fact that books are starting to be remembered as audio artifacts. I mean, they always were, like Victorian fireside, long winters in England, cold, long winters. People would read these, Trollope, Dickens. They were read aloud. They were meant to be sounded out. That's the way a lot of people received literature. Poetry, I mean, I've spent years of my life dissecting what poetry sounds like. When you're asked to do alliteration, assonance, all these things, they're phonic features. It's meant to be imagined as sound. Even if you don't speak it aloud, your inner voice is going to sound out those vowels, those diphthongs. You're going to hear them somewhere, even if it's here in inverted commas. They are audial in the way that we receive them. So yes, 100%.
And I suppose this ties in. So this idea, I suppose, that comes through in your book about the folk song. That's a partial artifact. It needs the living, it needs the breathing, it needs the performing. do you think one can say the same about
books.
Yeah.
Well, they need a reader.
Definitely.
So, you see, I don't really think of I think the inner voice, the old audial imagination of T.S. Eliot, Jeremy Prin's mental ears. You see, I think they are sound. So when I read, I kind of hear the sound of it in my head, and I think that sounded. So I think it just needs a machine, i.e. a human brain, to set it going. I don't think a book doesn't exist if you don't read it aloud, though. I've read most of the books I've read have been on the tube or whatever, or I am being silent to everybody else, but in my head I'm hearing everything.
Yeah,
it's like my brain is a record player.
Yeah, same. You know, like connecting to that, you say that the folk song narratives offer an official but compelling accumulation of human experiences, whereby they become semantically more akin to music than to text, loaded with a different kind of meaning, in which human experiences, while unspecific, is recognizable. Does this entail a certain freedom? If we can hear it even though we're not reading aloud, this kind of sonic implication, how it relates then to text. Um, can we connect that to freedom
Yeah.
in some way?
I just don't really see the boundaries between any of these things. That's the honest truth. I don't see that a written text is any different to a recorded text or to somebody speaking in a room, or because all of it involves the imagination of sound or the perception of sound or the creation of sound. Like everything, we're translating these little scratches on a page into something that resembles noise, even if it's not noisy in terms of sound waves bouncing around in a room. We are imagining sound. I just don't. I don't understand. I don't understand why anyone separates it all out. I just think it's all the same. It's all expressions of meaning that communicate emotion and that generate a kind of response, an affective response. It doesn't really matter how it does it. I think sound is involved almost at every level, and so literature becomes music, becomes emotion, becomes understanding, becomes performance, and all of these, they're all sort of intelligence in action, all of them.
Absolutely, yeah. And in terms of this kind of this multivalence, this earlier in our conversation, we were talking about you step into the skin of something and then you step back out and you slip on another skin. So you have it at that kind of that narratival perspective. That's one way, and then I suppose that kind of the imagery which layers over, and so I think it seems to me at that point where it becomes it might become semantically more like music. That is that slipperiness that you can't pin down, and so how that might facilitate freedom. So you can say one thing, but you might actually be meaning something else, or pushing meanings, stretching meanings.
And my work as a songwriter, I'm constantly pushing and pulling between the words and the music, like trying to figure out how a melody might reveal more, undermine, contradict, create a false, like red herring, the interaction between, and there's lovely sort of slippage between you think 50-50 words and music, but it's not like that because the words have an innate musicality of their own. There's a beautiful episode of Notes on Music, which is a lovely Laura Barton series on Radio 4 on the BBC for listeners in the UK, where Anais Mitchell, the songwriter, is interviewed, amongst other people, Simon Armitage, and they're discussing song lyrics and this idea of how words in lyrics, like sha-na-na-na in Van Morrison's Brown Eyed Girl, they don't mean anything. And actually it connects so closely with folk songs, which have bar, billy, bar, and these little burdens like the broom, there are these little turnaround nonsense lines in a lot of folk songs. And they're almost designed for the singer who's going to sing 40 verses just to have a little rest and a perch, just to be able to collect themselves for the next barrage. But there's also, they kind of start to mean something in their nonsense. They take on loads as the songs are sung over and over again. Or in the case of Van Morrison, it's that's so expressive, that sha-na-na-na. It means so much. It's so hard to explain it in semantic terms, but it's absolutely loaded with joy. Like, it's just this explosion of noisy joy, which is more akin to the music of that song than the lyrical content, but it's still, it would be in the booklet as words. So with songwriting, there's a constant bleed and a freedom to cross the boundary between words and music all the time.
I think that also connects to ideas around historical certainty and how folk songs dismantles that, such that they are more story than history. Um, so performers change lyrics of songs, making them, one's own, or have these kind of sonic interjections. What are the implications that you might think of this for creating this kind of countertemporal vision, that is a vision that carves out a space for thinking about alternative notions of freedom?
Well, so this idea of folk tales and folk songs travelling across boundaries is quite well documented. There's in the child ballads, F.J. Child's massive collection of folk songs, which has come to be seen as a sort of Bible of folk song, although there's some notable omissions. But anyway, he wrote the most incredible notes about these songs, some of them way more extensive than others, but the journeys that these songs have made from Syria, from Spain, like all across continental Europe, from India, from Mongolia, like extraordinary journeys. And yeah, so histories shift, so armies enlarge, shrink, the names of generals change, the names of protagonists change. And actually what happens is the stories and the songs get boiled down and boiled down and boiled down to those bones that I mentioned before. It's like this essential sort of uber story in a way, which can travel with people and go wherever it needs to go. And I think there's something incredibly liberating about that idea, that these songs don't really belong to anybody, that they belong to everybody, and that they've shape-shifted to fit different circumstances and different periods of time and different circumstances, but that there's something in there that's always been useful, so that's why it's been carried forward. When Cecil Sharp talked about the ways that folk songs travel, one of the things he identified was this idea of selection, which is that communities pick what's useful to them, what serves them, and they jettison the rest. So the songs that come down have served somebody at some point. They've been useful to explain some predicament, to either project a fantasy that gets people through hardship or to challenge the authority. It seems sometimes it's a bit of both. But yeah, there is this great levelling, and this idea of lack of ownership is extremely liberating, I think, in this day and age of, extreme ownership. And it's interesting as a songwriter. On the one hand, I have all my songs registered at PRS, but at the other, I have no idea how I write songs. I do my due diligence of my writing, my morning pages and so on. I do what I need to do, my discipline, but I wait for birds to fly in the window. I have no ownership over it at all. And I think, and most creatives I know feel very similar, that there's this dichotomy that you kind of own it, but you're not responsible for it at all. It just arrives from somewhere else. it's a paradox. I don't understand it. I don't care to. But I think right now, the idea of a proliferation of narratives is quite interesting, because really we're living in an age of post-truth and a proliferation of narratives. And maybe there's something that can be learned from the folk song tradition and the folk tale tradition about how to handle truth. I don't know. I'm sure there's something we can learn from acknowledging that there are different versions, different writers, different authorities, and learning how to be better judges of the material coming at us, and to take what we need to be more magpie, maybe.
And do you see, Carter's use of folk music structures, particularly in the manipulation of repetition and refrain and rhythm, as aligned with this kind of counter-temporal vision? How might this kind of reorient our understanding about futurity in her work or freedom in her work? Um, because I think it really connects towards, what you were just speaking about, and how that is enacted in the actual structure of the right.
Yeah. I find it really fascinating how her imagination was coloured by her exposure to this form. It wasn't just so she uses rhythmic elements as a kind of atmospheric painting thing. She uses the gender blindness a lot. I mean, she slips into male characters all the time, and she doesn't care, which is really refreshing, and I think that's something to learn as well. There's a kind of riot, a sort of gender riot going on in her work, which is very timely. In fact, it's probably only starting to make sense now, to be honest. But there's also, it goes bigger than that. I'm not a classically trained musician at all. I'm folk and I jazz and I play by ear. But I am aware of something called Schenkerian analysis, which is, from what I understand, when you see a shape and then you see a shape on a tiny level and then you see it on a big level. Is that a fair summing up of it? So I noticed her doing that too. So that dactylic business that I talked about earlier, the da-da-da, I saw it at micro level in terms of a sentence. So a little bit of in her grammar, basically, in the kind of the gravity between her words, like the way her solar system of a sentence would hold itself together and the gravity would pull between words. So it's there. But then you zoom back, and something like Knights of the Circus, when you see it writ large, it's a dactyl. There are 3 chapters. It starts in London, boom, stressed. And then it goes off to St. Petersburg, unstressed. And then you end up in the Siberian wastes, unstressed. So you can kind of see she's borrowing the structures. It's like fractals or something. She's got these little rhythmic structures right down at the nano, and then you can back off and see how her whole imagination is utilised. She can breathe a whole novel. The shape of a whole story can be coloured by the shape that she's learnt from somewhere else. And I love this. It's like a relay race with her. And maybe that's the secret with her. It's this relay race, this freeing relay race, where she'll take a baton, she'll make it her own, she runs with it, she does what she does, but then she passes it on. And that being part of the river, I think, is also where I find her work so incredibly inspiring and liberating, because she's just passed on so much stuff to other people. Not just and loads of writers cite her. I don't want to just linger on the musicians, but really the musicians are the ones that I'm most aware of. And I think that being part of a much bigger conversation, and she was conscious of that. I know she was. There's bits and pieces in her writing that make sure she was aware of her legacy. Leaving it for the girls, she wrote as she was dying, doing the collection of folk songs for the Virago, the fairy tales, the collection of fairy tales for Virago. So yeah, that's being part of that longer conversation of sucking influences in. It's like a running stitch move of pulling things in, generating original material, having a conversation with the past and the future all at the same time, and then out it comes and is jettisoned off to a whole new generations of songwriters, musicians, writers. Extraordinary. Yeah, I think that's how she used it. It's this onward move.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely questions.
I just before we do want to talk about what you're working on. Before we do though, and before we kind of leave Carter, I wonder if we might just give a voice to these bird women that she has, and this idea of hybrids and chimeras, and I suppose because we've been speaking so much about flux, that kind of state of being that one enters into as one slips in and out, and this stretching and pulling. Can you tell us a little bit more about these bird women that Carter has? And I suppose here we were thinking about just hybridity and ways of both. You've got ideas of entrapment, breaking free, but also giving voice to maybe something that doesn't have a voice.
Well, the most obvious one, of course, is Feathers, who is this magnificent circus performer in Nights at the Circus. And it took me about reading it about 5 times, I think, to realise my interpretation of the ending, which I'm not going to, I don't want to spoil anyone's fun with it, but I am utterly convinced that she is real, like she's a bird girl, which is it's just great. And the big joke is that she's not a virgin, which I just think is hilarious. She's this extraordinary stitching, and you can't. I guess strictly speaking, she's hybridic because you can't see the joins, and that's the big difference between a chimera and a hybrid, as far as I can tell, is that chimeras you can sort of tell, you can see the joins, and a hybrid you can't. Like a hybrid is a natural born entity from 2 disparate parents, whereas a chimera is sort of made, like a sort of stitched together, and there's quite a few of those in Carter's work as well. I'm thinking of there's prostitutes in Hoffman who are definitely stitched together. You can tell they're part vegetable, part brute, like they're deliberately monstrous. But that's another avenue to go off down. But with Feathers, she's a hybrid on every level. So her body is unusual. She's got these wings, and she's very big. Her hands and feet are big. Her head is big. Her face is big. But she's a mixture on all levels. Her accent is weird. She's got Cockney, but then she talks. She's sort of stitched together in all kinds of different ways. She has different levels of language that she deploys. Sometimes she's speaking in a simple fashion. Sometimes it's incredibly highbrow academic. She's just always undermining. Whatever you think she is, the next minute she tells you she's not. And I love that for Carter, writing this character who's constantly making you feel like you were making assumptions and reminding you never to do that. She's always freeing herself from your preconceptions. But there's an ancient association between women and birds and violence and silence. And it goes back to Philomel, but probably before that. And I find the echoes of those images really interesting. They do come through Carter, that it's definitely a sort of feminist agenda that she's building to talk about assumptions and silencing, and how she just won't let that happen. She's constantly keeping things moving and allows for that character, and it happens in other places as well, but she's making sure we don't silence those characters all the time. It's just it's like an unstitching of history. She's trying to rewrite that narrative of birds and violence and silence. It's like this bird won't be silenced. It's an extraordinary kind of writing back to an old story, which is in keeping with everything else she's doing.
Thank you. So, I suppose thinking forward then to your own practice, and of course this central idea you have, which I struggle to pronounce.
Canarography.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, I made it up, so we can say what we want.
But I'd like to say it how you would like it said. But so thank you. Are these elements, these kind of, how do they come over into your own practice? How does the canarographic, does it, emerge in your own practice?
Yes. So the album that I've just made, every track is a composite of a piece of spoken word and then a song. And a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, the bit of spoken word that's coming before the song is in fact what I was writing in those morning pages that I was talking about, just as the song came out. Because I often write songs by accident when I'm doing my morning pages. I'll suddenly find I've been rhyming for 10 lines and I didn't even know. So I'm trying to capture that quicksand moment, that bit where, when do you know when does a bit of writing stop and a song start? Like, it's just it's a fascinating sort of hinterland for me. I mean, I kind of think it's all the same, as I've said before, but I wanted to try and identify the relationship between them and how there's not so much difference between them, but to see the relationship between what comes before and what comes next when you're creating, because it's all big load of soup really, and it just sort of emerges. So it was an experiment, but it started as I went through a very frenzied writing period, about 6 months, where I was writing far more than I normally do, and these bits of prosy poetry, I don't know what they are. I mean, you can figure it out. I'm not sure, but these other bits of language were coming out with the songs, and I didn't want to cut them off. It felt that they were part and parcel of the thing. Actually, what happened was, on an album about 5 years ago, no less than that, 3 years ago, there is one song where I did this, and I think that was the precursor. It was like this kind of, I was just testing the water to see, does that work? Does it work if you play with what people think a song is? What is prose? What is poetry? What is a song? Are they that different? And I did exactly that with a song called Bracklesham Bay. And having done that almost as a proof of concept, I felt allowed to. But it kind of all came from the Carter stuff, because I'd put elements of Carter's writing next to the song that I felt influenced her on a record, so that the two audio pieces were next to each other. So it's been coming for a while. And now I'm here. I've just come from doing a tour of performing the spoken word and songs together for the first time, and I've never done that before, and it was beautiful. It was an amazing experience to not show any difference between spoken word and song, just to present it as a fait accompli. It's like done. It's its own thing. It doesn't really matter what the label is. It's just free to be what it is, and you can take from that what you want. As a performer, I found it really interesting in that with a song, when you start to sing a song normally, it takes people usually the first verse to kind of get their feet of your setting, your topic, so that by the time you get to the first chorus, they're in. But what I found using these bits of prose and poetry ahead of the song was almost like it was like one of those nets, the nets that you put like a purse string, like you pull them. It kind of let me do a massive sweep of the room and just pull everybody down, so that by the time we got to the first line of the first verse, everyone was in the song. So it's a very different emotional experience. It was much more concentrated and much more intense. And I really loved it, and I want to do it for the rest of my life now. So, but it's a different form. It's like it's almost like it's its own thing. It's just wonderful. I don't know what it's called yet. I have to come up with another new word.
But I mean, the spoken words I find are beautiful. and can stand alone should you want to have them stand alone. As I was listening also, they sound quite magical, because I suppose having then read how you kind of think of Carter, and then, you know, this idea of multiplicity, co-authoring, and just the way that you speak, and then the kind of we'll have something for people to hear, but the kind of the layers of voices as you speak, it's really quite powerful. Was this kind of an intentional in terms of how you put those spoken word sections together?
So the music and the words, a lot of that had been sort of planned out. What wasn't planned out was the feathering of the voices. And that was, I worked with an amazing producer for the whole record called Ethan Johns, who's just a remarkable human and has made amazing records. And he, right from the beginning, he said, I want to do this. And he wanted me to basically perform the spoken word sections multiple times. And that because when you listen to it, you could be forgiven for thinking it's just one performance that he's sort of copied and pasted and cut and pasted and moved around. But it's not. That's like, I did all those takes on location in caves, by rivers. We went in a church. We went up against a holy standing stone. It was all in Wales, around the chapel where we recorded. And he took all the takes and he just stuck them in, and he's just stacked them. And I don't know what he did. I don't know whether he moved them around much, or whether, because he's also a big believer in allowing the universe in as a co-creator. So he may have just allowed them to fall where they landed, because I wasn't doing them to the music or anything. There was no click. There was no guiding metronome to me reading those bits aloud. It was just, I just read them. So they were all over the place in terms of timing. And I don't know how much he moved them around once he got them into the computer, but all the tracks would be laid out. And I think he was very specific about picking one performance that was the one that sort of sat slightly proud. And all the others, he used reverb and regression to kind of just to feather them around. But I don't know how much he actually moved them. He might have been a real purist and not even touched them. I think he did a tiny bit, nipped and tucked here and there, but that's just a bunch of recordings, but all done on location. But he saw that right from the get-go. That was what he always said, that's what I want to do. I want to take a Zoom mic, go off into a cave, record you loads of times, layer it up, get this kind of cacophony going. And it was weird, when he told me as an idea, I did think, that's going to sound like a mess. Like, how are you going to understand any of it? And we listened to the first time that we opened up the file and had a review, and it was like, that's doing the opposite. It's doing this. It clarifies it somehow. I don't know what it is, why, but it's there's something about the relief of it that is lovely, and that's completely his genius, and I'm so proud of him for it. It was just great. But a lot of the other stuff a lot of the music is the bass player John Thorne composed he's got all these amazing pedals, so all that kind of sweeping electronica noise behind is all John writing music to my words, and we worked that out over months, back and forth. So there's layers, there's lots of layers in those recordings, and there's different places as well. There's like cottages and stuff that John and I had done at home. I can hear all of it in there, and it's lovely, because those bits, the songs were all recorded on site in Wales in 5 days. It was like a complete blitz. But the prologues are much more of an accretion. But they all seem to go together. It's lovely how it all just sort of goes together. I don't know how. That's the magic of Ethan, I think, the producer.
It's just lovely to hear that kind of that collaborative. I mean, all music is kind of, but not just a collaborative. It's a relinquishing of control, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, we're back to this idea of possession. You could very well think, this is my creation, and please do this then in this way.
Yeah. No, it was the antithesis of that from the get-go, actually. It was wonderful. The songs took me over. Then working with people that you really respect, and and have loved what they've done. I got very lucky with a piano player, a chap called Neil Cowley, who's an incredible jazz pianist. He's off on tour at the moment with his trio, and they're just remarkable. And he hadn't even heard the song. We arrived in the studio. I was bricking myself. I thought, oh gosh, I'm working with all these really high caliber people. I need to. So I was very heavily rehearsed. And Neil had not listened to any of the demos or anything. He just hadn't. But he didn't want to. He wanted to be able to respond in real time. Oh, the guy's a genius. And it's just, his performances are so beautiful. I can't believe it. I still can't quite believe he agreed to do it. So the whole thing was a dream, and really, I'm so proud of the record. But I don't feel any. It's like luck. I feel kind of like starstruck that I was even part of it. But it's this coming together of 4 people, and you do stuff together that you couldn't. It'll never happen again, and you couldn't have done it on your own. I certainly couldn't have done any of it on my own. I had the songs, but I didn't have those performances and that energy, that intensity, that focus. It's such a gift. Like, it's extraordinary. I feel so lucky to have had that experience, actually.
It is amazing. It is.
Thank you.
Are there... so as I've been listening, I mentioned it briefly before we started our conversation, but I think that my question did I hear a bit of Errol King in some of the tracks? And thankfully you agreed.
Yes.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, I think Carter's fingerprints are all over the record, actually, because I'm steeped in her. I mean, having spent 4 years on a PhD not long before, and the last album was all about her. I just, she's very much, so I'm one of the musicians that have really been influenced by her. And I find the way that she talks about the Errol King and the Greenwood help me to explain and frame all kinds of feelings that I continue to have. Like, I'm knocking on 50. I'll be 50 later this year. And it just, life keeps going, doesn't it? You keep having feelings. You keep experiencing new things, and it doesn't just sort of end. And using all these images, this kind of tapestry of images, or a network. I think folk songs do this too, but everything I've ever read always comes into play when I'm writing. And so this album in particular, there's a lot of literature backlighting it. There's a lot of John Donne, there's a lot of Sylvia Plath, and there's a lot of Carter. Sort of, and I can feel them like loved ones at my shoulders, like we all, with the writing that we love. So yeah, I'm aware, and there's probably stuff I'm not aware of as well that is there. But I can feel Carter very strongly in the images of the woods, as a kind of maze for an emotional exploration, and trying to find freedom in worlds that can feel quite constricted. I think personal freedom, it can be a wonderful metaphor for that attempt to try and figure out how you feel as a form of freedom. Dirt track of ditch. Ring, ancient and sacred. These woods have felt us all. Held us all so many times. And as I pace the soft path littered with leaves, and flanked with the exposed roots of the trees, snaking and tangling like arms in the earth, the arms of all the dead who have felt this before. I sense that I'm not alone here, even though I came here to be alone. In the leaves, in the branches, in the roots, it crackles. And if I could see it, it would be static, like sparks in my hair, like fireflies. Footfall in the woods, the stark beauty of dark earth, And roots like bones, like snakes, like hands. Roots like bones, like snakes. Fresh smell of rain and darkening leaf mulch. Fresh smell of rain and darkening. Pigeons and crows sailing the breeze. Pigeons and crows. As the sun sets mid-afternoon. As the sun sets mid-afternoon. A strange light in the sky, like a promise. A strange light in the sky. I am not alone here. Even though I came to be alone. I am not alone here. Even though I came to be alone. Lord knows I'm trying so hard to be good. So I take myself up to Wandlebury Wood. But you are all around me. You are all around me. The branches keep time, they follow a score. A tune for old souls who've been here before. And you are all around me. I don't know how you found me here. Just come. I've nowhere else to run. I feel you in the sunlight on my skin. Oh, come and climb inside my head. There's nothing to be said that can't be sung to you. But you're 100 miles away, so I must be going crazy.
I suppose it really just, I mean, it's been wonderful speaking to you, both going through the kind of the Angela Carter, your thoughts on that. I mean, it's opened up. I had read some Angela Carter, but I'll definitely be reading more. But that kind of,
Yeah, same.
yeah, right. The attention to that kind, it's sonic materiality. It's embodied. It's effective. It's not just words on a page, which we know, but you bring it to life. In an extraordinary way, and then of course it opens out. It has further implications. You know, how do we approach other texts? Moreover, how should we think about song?
I know. I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to get song into the academy, and I'll continue to do so as a writer, but also just as a lover of songs. They've absolutely defined my life. Like the number of times I've been at a crossroads, like having a moment, and a song has just given me the biggest hug or just stood with me. I mean, funerals. Like I was listening to a vicar talking about why they became a vicar. I think it was Reverend Richard Coles. And he said something along the lines of, I want to be there on the most important days of people's lives. And I just thought, me too. That's what that's the songwriter mission as well, is to create the song that you want to, be there that terrible day when you're putting someone you love in the ground, or at the birth of your child, or those big moments when you remember what was playing, like your wedding, your first dance at your wedding, these pivotal. I remember what played on my first kiss, it was Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. It's like, it's formed my life. These songs are there. They're massive. They are works of art, and they're not just the words on the page. And I think this is the thing, is that they are 360-degree objects. And you see, the secret is, I don't think books are just the word on the page either. And as soon as we can become aware of that 360-degree pop-up, substance, the texture of these objects that we've got. We know what they're like. We just haven't realised it yet. We haven't been able to articulate it properly. So yeah, I long for song to be. I think folk songs should be studied. I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard of the child ballads before I started getting into my projects. They should be on the syllabus. This is part of our national identity. Why? I understand that when you look at them in isolation, when you look at the words in isolation, you could be forgiven for thinking they're quite pedestrian. I mean, I think that about William Blake sometimes, but I know better than to think that because I understand William Blake in a different way. And I think, actually, Blake was writing songs of experience and songs of innocence as well, note. But I think there are ways of reading where you take in the 360-degree audiality and the significance of those years and years of accretion of patina, and you're going to see it in a different way, and it shouldn't just be lost. So, yes, I would love that to happen. I'll keep striving.
Absolutely, and it's about the past, it's about the present, it's about the future. As we've been saying, it's about understanding ourselves, understanding where we are in things. So yes, please, you have to keep trying.
Okay, I'll do my best. Well, thank you for talking. It helps enormously to have conversations like this one. It's been really enlightening. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been, I think, really fruitful. I think in terms of our ongoing conversations about what freedom might be, different practices of freedom, because of course there are many different musical practices of freedom. So thank you. It's been wonderful.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.